Hey, what is up YouTube? Kolst here, and we're here for the first one of these I've done in a while, a class tier list video, the first one for the Shadows and the Badlands arena meta. So if you're new here or you haven't seen one of these before, basically the purpose of these is to provide a resource to just tell you which of the good classes, the bad classes, which ones you want to be taking, and I also go over the meta a bit for each class to just give an idea of like how you should be playing these classes and, you know, just how to draft play it and how to win the most games if you do draft these classes. And as well, by the way, there was also a patch here which has some arena changes, which includes some card bans and a few other, I think, minor bug fixes and readjustments. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Before I get there, though, I do want to respond to just a little bit of feedback I've gotten. I get comments. I mean, I've tended to ignore these over the years, but like I've gotten this comment enough times. I should probably respond to it eventually. The feedback of, hey, why don't you play more of the bad classes? I want to watch the bad classes. Well, there's a couple of reasons I don't play the bad classes. First of all, the game is, at least like presently as well, especially very imbalanced right now. You should just not be playing the bad classes. I don't play this game 50 hours a week, but in addition, I play all of my decks. I know there are some players and streamers you might see who, you know, they might retire half their decks. Any deck they don't like or they don't think is very good, they just don't play it. I play every deck, so I don't have time to just throw away runs by picking bad classes. I just don't. Personally, I'm just not all that interested in essentially engaging in that whole barcoding experience. I like to play the good decks, the bad decks that I do draft, but I don't want to make it harder on myself. So that's just the way that I prefer to play the game. And I only upload runs that I like, and if I am just trolling around with bad classes, I'm not going to like the runs. So it's just, you're not going to get any videos out of me if I play the bad classes. I'm just going to hate it. So I'm not going to do it. So ultimately, if you come to me asking like, hey, can you please play the bad classes? You're asking the wrong person. If you want me to play the other classes, you should actually go to Blizzard and tell them to balance the game a bit better. Now, please don't harass devs or anything, but just, you know, use appropriate channels to say, hey, it would be nice if, you know, it would help our experience. I feel like this is important that, hey, if the classes were a little more balanced, it'd be more diversity, you know, that kind of thing. Because again, the balance is really bad right now, but you know, it's early. I think they'll get there. I think they will adjust it, but just especially early season balance can be really bad. So just, you know, to throw it out there, because I have a lot of Death Knight runs already. There's going to be more coming. It's just to let you guys know. But in any case, let's talk about the patch as well. I'll just show, like, I mean, this is not going to surprise anyone. I think Death Knight's going to be completely like in a tier of its own. Death Knight is alone in S tier, but that is getting adjusted a bit by these updates here from this patch, which we'll talk about now. The key arena update here is that the following cards have been banned from arena deck drafting. Lord Marogar, Keeper's Strength, Sickly Grimewalker, those three cards were banned for being strong, and then Mysterious Challenger and Desert Obelisk were banned for actually being bad. So they're addressing some really strong cards and also some really bad cards. Due to the arena adjustment they made, Marogar became really, really common suddenly, so that previously it was in like 1% decks, it jumped up to like 15% of Death Knight decks. So they adjusted in this way to ban it. Keeper's Strength as well in Paladin, just being a big board clear that just doesn't feel very fair in arena. And Sickly Grimewalker also being a big poison, which also creates a whole lot of clears that don't feel very fair in arena. Also an annoying minion that's just hard to remove sometimes as well. So I think these are very good changes for arena. And because, you know, they banned specifically cards in Death Knight and Paladin, these are classes that were very strong. They're still going to be strong, but it did as well just bring the balance a little bit more in check. So I think these were really great changes by Blizzard. Oh, and there are a couple bugs I should mention as well. They do have a fix here. The fix, if you're aware, that stick up could give Rogue Drully the Kid. That has been fixed here. But as well, there's another bug. I believe it's a bug in Arena right now, which is that discovers cannot discover from the new set right now. You cannot, if you're looking to try to fish for something, for example, if you're playing Warrior, trying to get some of the new really good taunt cards, you're just not able to get them right now. If you're watching this after the expansion launch, the official release on Tuesday, I would expect that will be fixed as of then. But just if you're watching this right now, just to be aware, you're not actually able to discover those things. Very important for like Death Knight, you can't get Reska off of a discover, which you will be able to most likely as of Tuesday, unless they prevent that from being a thing or they ban Farmhand or whatever. So just something to keep in mind. Oh, and the other change I should also mention as well, I don't remember if I put this in the last video, but if you're not aware, in addition to the bans they listed here, the Scourge is also banned from drafting. You can, again, still discover it in Death Knight, but you're just not able to draft it. Regardless of these changes, Death Knight remains in a tier of its own at S tier. Death Knight is still very, very strong. And by the way, I do have one piece of advice with drafting Death Knight is that if you want to maximize your win rate at Death Knight, there's one very simple thing you can do, and that is to absolutely make sure that you draft double Unholy. If you do not draft double Unholy, you are not taking advantage of Farmhand and just a whole lot of the other really strong double Unholy cards. You want to make absolutely sure that you have access to those. So I really think you absolutely want to force double Unholy. That's not always the case in Death Knight, but right now the balance is just really off internally within Death Knight, within the runes. You definitely want to make sure that you draft double Unholy if you want to win. And with that, we'll talk next about the A tier. So with the A tier, I already addressed Paladin. Yeah, Paladin was like the clear number 2 before this adjustment. And Paladin is still going to remain in the A tier, although it will have some company now that there are other classes as well that did not lose one of their key cards. And so even though Paladin lost Keeper Strength, which was one of their strongest cards, they still have the new card, Prismatic Beam. It's still a very good board clear that just allows them to stay alive, and they have all of these hand buffs and like Lifesteal Rush and other kind of greedy cards that just enable Paladin to go for that like big hand strategy just to, you know, have a lot of value, and it just kind of works right now. So in a sense, it can be a good counter to Death Knights because they have those clears. Not something Paladin has traditionally had, but all of a sudden they have. So makes Paladin very, very strong. Next up, joining Paladin in A tier, we do have Warrior. Warrior's gameplay is very strategically very simple. It is that they just try to make a lot of taunts, they try to make a lot of armor, they board clear everything you do, and then you eventually you give up because you might fatigue if they can't kill you before then. Warrior also has access to a lot of really strong legendaries like Odin, but also the TNT legendary, the new card that is a whole lot of disruption and pretty much guarantees a win in a very long game. So it's very often the big feared control class. You don't want to get into a long game against Warrior because it's, first of all, it's going to be very long, and second of all, you may not have the best chances to win unless you have something really broken yourself. And with that, we'll move on to the third class, the last class that I'm going to be putting in the A tier, and that is actually Hunter. I'm actually pretty surprised that Hunter is doing so well according to the stats right now. But I think the big reason is that Hunter is just the one class, other than Death Knight essentially, that can actually get under a lot of these slower, greedier decks. It's a very slow, greedy meta. There's just a lot of games that go very, very long. But Hunter just has things like the 1 mana 4/1s, for example, the card that gives you 3 of those, just things like that enable them to do things. And obviously they're Hunters, they can go face, like they just have a lot more of the tools to do that than anyone else. You have very little chance to actually win as an aggro player if you're not a Hunter, but Hunter does actually manage to do it pretty well. So if you like that aggressive play style, I would definitely recommend trying it out with Hunter and probably not so much with some of the other classes. And with that, we'll move on to the next tier we have here, which will be the B tier. We'll have 3 classes on this tier as well. The first class will be Shaman. Shaman, I'm a little surprised, has dropped as far as it was. Shaman was probably like the number 2 class before this rotation. But, you know, they lost Pack the House, they lost Horn of Winter. They just got a bit weaker. They still feel very similar, but I think some of the other classes just got a lot stronger. And yeah, some of those scam win conditions just don't exist anymore. So that's just allowed Shaman to fall quite a bit in the rankings. Shaman is still fine, but we're already below the 50% win rate mark, by the way. All of the classes below A tier are actually below average. So, you know, these are classes you don't really want, but Shaman's at least serviceable. It does still work. They still have some big board clears. They still have some tempo. It's just, they have a lot of healing as well with like the Walking Mountain potentially, although it's an epic, so you don't see it as much. It has a lot of potential, but a lot of the time you're just going to come up short against some of the other classes. Next class we're going to be talking about in the B tier is Druid. Now, Druid is a very weird one. I'm putting them here because this is the average placement, but really Druid is just like either very good or very bad. And the thing that makes it either very good or very bad is just whether or not you have very specific choose one synergies or whether you have the new Highlander legendary Rheastraza, because Rheastraza is one of the best cards in the game. period in any class, that will allow you to just automatically win a lot of the slower games against warrior, for example. There's just nothing they can do once you get one free dragon every turn. You just automatically win. So the thing with druid is this is one you're taking more as a gamble. It's not nearly as consistent as shaman, for example. It's either going to perform basically like an A or an S tier class, or it's going to be probably more like a C or an F tier class even. But on average, druid will fall somewhere in the middle. So depending on whether or not you like to, gamble like that, that would be whether or not I would recommend if you actually pick druid right now. And with that, we'll move on to the last class in the B tier, and that is mage. Mage also dropped off a lot compared to shaman. Mage still does kind of similar-ish things to what they were doing in previous metas, but mage just lost a lot of their really good tools. Their late game isn't as good as it used to be. Their survivability just isn't as good as it used to be as well. They still have a lot of value, but their value isn't even that good compared to some of the other classes such as warrior, and it can just be very, very hard to stay alive as mage. So it can work, but it's just you are very vulnerable often as mage because you just don't really have super amazing tools consistently to stay alive. And with that, we're going to move to the C tier. There are going to be 3 classes we're going to talk about in the C tier. The first one we have here is Demon Hunter. So Demon Hunter has some good cards. Specifically, they have like the new 6 mana double 6/6 rush. It's now cast. You get a copy. That's very, very strong. They still have Inquisitor and stuff. It's very good. But Demon Hunter definitely just gets outclassed on value by a lot of other classes, and aggro just doesn't feel like a great strategy right now. They still, in spite of having some of those tools, they don't do it nearly as well as Hunter does. They can get off to a slower start, and then it just doesn't really work exactly. So you can play Demon Hunter and hope that you get a good roll. There are some good control cards, but they're just all really high rarity. So a lot of that just makes Demon Hunter very inconsistent. It's very hard to like actually beat a warrior or a death knight or something. A lot of the control classes are just going to stuff you. There's too much healing and stuff. It's just not going to work very well. Next up on the C tier, we will put Rogue. Rogue does very fundamentally a lot of the same things it has been doing recently. For a brief period it was bugged, and the new card Stick Up could actually generate its own legendary, and that was very powerful, but that has been fixed, so that no longer happens. And the thing with Rogue is it's kind of a similar spot as a Demon Hunter in a sense that, yeah, like its tools are just not as good or consistent as a lot of the other classes. The best thing Rogue can really do to beat you is to just randomly discover something from a class that actually is good, and then use those cards to beat you. That is possible, but otherwise that just isn't very consistent. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you miss your discovers of other classes. You don't usually get that many. And then if you do, it's just going to be very hard for you to win. So Rogue can work. It does definitely have some high rolls available with some of their legendaries, for example, but it's just not a very consistent class as well. And the last class we're going to be putting into the C tier here is Warlock. Warlock actually is a rather consistent class. I don't think they can consistently get the new sludge stuff. That's part of the issue they have. It's just not that many cards to draft, and some of them are high rarity. Same with excavates. Their excavates are pretty high rarity. So unfortunately that kind of stuff is not very consistent. And then Warlock still does Warlock things, but ultimately they're just kind of fair again compared to a lot of the other classes. Their stuff just isn't really that strong. Abyssal Enforcer, for example, does not win you games automatically like it used to. So it makes Warlock still relatively playable. All these classes in the C tier are playable, but you're just going to be at a disadvantage against most of your opponents. And with that, we're going to move on to the last class on this tier list, and that is Priest. Priest is just really bad. Just don't pick Priest. Priest doesn't really do anything well. They do heal slightly better than they used to, but like again, like if you play Priest, like you probably just want to try to discover things again from other classes or something if it's possible, or steal from your opponent. But there isn't even a lot of stealing in Priest right now. Like they really just don't do anything well, and their offering rates are not very high. They've been nerfed, so it's like just don't play Priest. It's really that simple. And with that, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. That is it for this tier list video. I'm really interested to see which class have been working out for you and all of that. What do you think about this new arena meta? It's definitely an exciting time because Blizzard seems to have a bit more eyes on arena, as they have had a lot of, well, really most times in the past. So it's a very cool time to be playing arena. I hope you've enjoyed playing with the new cards in the new set as well, if you're coming in from standard or wherever else you usually enjoy Hearthstone. But with that, I appreciate you all hanging out. We'll see you guys in the next one. Like, subscribe, all these things. All right, bye-bye.